You know, we all love to hate Mondays, but Cleopatra hated Mondays a little more than most people. You see, she had to start her week by slaying her enemies in battle. And not just any enemies, mind you, but members of her own family. Welcome to my channel. Subscribe. This is Cleopatra's life in 60 seconds. Okay, so this isn't how Cleopatra looked. That's just what Hollywood chose to make her look. Historians believe that she actually looked something like this. Not too shabby, right? Cleopatra was born on July 69 BC in the city of Alexandria. She was the last active ruler of the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt, but before we get into the juicy stuff, let's talk about her parents. Her mother was Cleopatra v. Tryphena, and her father was Ptolemy XII. Now, if you're scratching your head wondering who these folks are, don't worry. Neither do the first, but here's the 411. Cleopatra's parents were descendants of Ptolemy I, who was an officer under Alexander the Great. When Alexander died, Ptolemy took control of Egypt and established a dynasty that lasted for almost 300 years. So Cleopatra's family tree was pretty messed up, if you can call it that, because they were all half-siblings. Ooh, back to Cleopatra. She grew up knowing she was destined to rule one day. At the time, Egypt was a prosperous kingdom thanks to the riches of the Hellenistic world and the wealth of the East. Plus, they were making bank off the trade of luxury goods like ivory, incense, and spices. And let's not forget, Alexandria was a major player in the Mediterranean. It was like the OG global hub, so Cleopatra had it pretty cushy growing up. When Cleopatra was 14, her father kicked the bucket. Now, normally when this happened back in the day, the kid with the closest connection to the deceased monarch got the crown, but in this case, there was a twist. You see, her father decided that instead of passing the torch to Cleopatra, he wanted his son Ptolemy XIII to take the throne. He also arranged for Cleopatra to marry her brother, whom she probably thought was hot, because the two of them made a power move and murdered their own father. I mean, come on, they even enlisted the help of Cleopatra's own grandmother, Beroe, to plot the assassination. Talk about dysfunctional. But alas, their reign of terror didn't last forever. After only ruling for 5 years, Cleopatra and her brother were ousted by yet another sibling, this time her younger brother, Ptolemy XIV. But don't worry, they didn't kill each other. Instead, they just took a little trip to the coast and hung themselves. Fun times, right? And now you're probably thinking, why am I telling you all this? Well, because it's important to understand the kind of person Cleopatra was. She wasn't your average teenage girl. No, she was smart, ambitious, and knew exactly what she wanted. In fact, she was so determined to reclaim the throne that she teamed up with Julius Caesar and launched a counterattack against her brother. They managed to capture Alexandria, but then things got a bit messy. You see, Caesar was assassinated in Rome, and while we don't know the full story behind what went down, we do know that Cleopatra played a role in it. Let me break it down for you. See, Caesar had appointed Cleopatra's son, Caesarion, as the rightful heir to the throne. But when he was killed, everyone was like, oh, no, who will protect Caesarion now? Enter Mark Antony, Caesar's friend and military commander. He took it upon himself to defend Caesarion and even gave him a place in the Senate. But some people weren't happy about this, especially Octavian, who was Caesar's adopted son, and the future emperor Augustus. He saw Caesarion as a threat to his power, so he started spreading rumors that Caesarion wasn't really Caesar's biological son. Then he turned Mark Antony's lover, Cleopatra, into the villain of the story. He accused her of plotting with Caesar to seize power and labeled her and her sister, Arsinoe IV, as enemies of Rome. With this new narrative, Octavian gained support and eventually defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra. They both took their own lives to avoid being captured. But Caesarion wasn't so lucky. He ended up getting executed by Augustus. Now, I know you might be thinking, whoa, this chick had a rough life. But despite all this drama, Cleopatra still managed to have a pretty sweet gig. You see, while Alexandria was technically part of the Roman Empire, Cleopatra enjoyed a great deal of autonomy. She also had a personal army, which she used to keep the peace in the city. Plus, she loved to throw lavish parties. I mean, have you heard of the Feast of the Moon Festival? Yeah, me neither, but Cleopatra did. During this annual event, she would host poets, philosophers, and other intellectuals for dinner parties. The menu was always a surprise and included dishes from all over the known world. And of course, the food was just as extravagant as Cleopatra herself. Her biographer describes her as having rosy fingers, a crisp and delicate neck, a small mouth with naturally red lips, a nose that was neither too large nor too small, eyes that sparkled like stars, eyebrows that were never too highly arched, eyelashes that were long, and dark hair that fell in thick curls down her back. In short, she was the total package. And the cherry on top was her tongue. See, Cleopatra was a true polymath. She spoke 9 languages, including Egyptian, which was a big deal at the time because no one else in the empire did. She also loved reading romance novels, perhaps a little too much, because she was totally obsessed with finding her own happily ever after. Enter the dashing Roman general Pompey the Great. He was considered one of the most powerful men in Rome, and Cleopatra was smitten. She did everything she could to catch his eye, like sending him poetry, love letters, and, giant snakes. Yeah, it's true, but unfortunately, he didn't feel the same way about her. Don't worry, though, because she had a backup plan. When Pompey left Egypt, she set her sights on a new target, none other than Julius Caesar. He was in Egypt on a diplomatic mission, and Cleopatra wasted no time in making her move. She had herself smuggled into his palace disguised as a carpet. Talk about dedication, and it worked like a charm. They fell in love, and she bore him a son, Caesarion. But their romance wasn't exactly a walk in the park. You see, Caesar had a wife back in Rome, Calpurnia. And even though she didn't like Cleopatra, she wasn't about to let her take Caesar away from her. So Cleopatra had to play her cards right. She sent gifts and letters begging for forgiveness, and even threw in some flattery, calling Calpurnia the goddess Athena. It worked, and the two women formed an unlikely friendship. But it was short-lived because soon after, Cleopatra and Caesar were chilling in Rome together, where she showed off her mad style skills. We're talking flowing gowns with golden belts, jewelry made out of precious stones, and shoes with golden toes. But even though she was living the high life, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was a foreigner in a strange land. She missed her home and her people and dreamed of returning to Egypt, but when she told Caesar about her plans, he wasn't exactly thrilled. He wanted her to stay in Rome with him, but she wasn't having it. She was done playing second fiddle to Calpurnia, and she was about to let go of the chance to rule Egypt, so she did what any self-respecting queen would do. She packed her bags and hightailed it out of there. Mark Antony, though, he was all about it. He was like, yes, let's do this thing. And just like that, Cleopatra was back in Egypt living her best life. She wore traditional Egyptian clothing, worshipped the local gods, and even built a temple dedicated to her late father. But not everyone was happy about her return. The people of Alexandria weren't exactly thrilled to see her back, and they started causing trouble. Soon the whole city was in chaos, and Cleopatra had to flee to Syria, but she wasn't alone. She had Mark Antony by her side, and the two of them were pretty unstoppable. They conquered parts of Asia Minor and even threatened to invade Italy itself. But Cleopatra's enemies were always lurking in the shadows, waiting for their chance to strike. And when Caesar died, they finally got their opportunity. Octavian, who would later become the Emperor Augustus, took advantage of the situation and turned the public against Cleopatra. He labeled her a seductress and accused her of plotting to destroy Rome. The people bought it hook, line, and sinker, and Cleopatra found herself all alone. She tried to fight back, but it was no use. She and Mark Antony lost a naval battle against Octavian's forces and were forced to flee. In the end, they both took their own lives rather than face capture. And that, my friends, is how Cleopatra's life ended. Thanks for watching.